What's up everyone, welcome to Class 1A. My name is Dylan and today we're going to be taking on the My Hero Academia Iceberg. We're going to be breaking down every single one of these tiers one by one, going into all the points below them. There's a lot here, there's a lot of theories, there's a lot of side information, lots of great knowledge in here that you as a My Hero Academia fan might not know. Now, I know everyone watching this is a total lore master with My Hero, seen every piece of official content, broken it down inside and out, but in case you aren't, we're going to be going up to about chapter 330 of the manga, so that means for any of my anime only watchers out there, well past season 5, so spoiler warning here, you have been warned. But with that out of the way, thank you all so much for watching. Let's get into tier 1, the quirk list tier. Shonen anime. My Hero Academia is a shonen anime, it's the genre that it is. Now, shonen basically just means young boy's story, so it can mean a lot of different things, but typically this is anything you find in Shonen Jump, of course. It's about a young boy's story, there's some sort of power system involved, and there's a lot of fighting. Now, I think My Hero Academia is a really good mile marker for the old guard versus the new guard of shonen anime. Now, you look at some of the old classics, like Bleach at 686 chapters, Naruto at 700, and One Piece at 1000. These classics really set the trope for what the entire genre was. They were just stories that went on forever. And when it's all said and done, My Hero's can be well under 500 chapters. You look at a lot of other shonens out there right now, like Demon Slayer, which is already over, does this trope well because it's concise. It does go on for quite a bit, 500 is a lot. 500 definitely is a lot, but is well under what we're used to. And one of the benefits of keeping it short is there's not a ton of filler everywhere. You're able to take the main theme of the show and keep it concise. You don't have to drag it on forever. You have a main idea and you run with it. So it is a shonen anime, but it is definitely that of the new school. Deku will be the #1 hero. This is the story of how I became the greatest hero. This is what Deku says when season 1 starts, and basically every season after that is how he kicks it off. So on its surface, clearly this is a story about how Deku becomes the #1 hero. Horikoshi loves Star Wars. Horikoshi, the author of My Hero Academia, loves Western culture, and I think one of the things that shines through in his work the most is Star Wars. Horikoshi scatters Star Wars references all throughout the series, but one of the easiest ways to tell that there's a Star Wars reference is if there's a city, it's not a real city in Japan and it's just a city in the story, it's like a made-up one, it's probably named after a Star Wars planet. Some of the best examples for this is Hosu, which is just Hoth but in the Japanese translation of it, and Kamino, the city where they build all the clones, and also the area where they have all the Nomu. And it doesn't just stop at the planets either. If you look at All For One, he's very Vader-like, even has a respirator in the earlier seasons, and Gran Torino, who, just looking at him, he's a silly, wise mentor, but when things get serious, he gets very serious about his mentorship. Of course, that's just Yoda. Toya Todoroki revised. Now, this is under-revised because it used to be a fan theory of who he was, but it turns out we got a reveal, and that fan theory was actually true. Toya Todoroki being revealed, of course, as none other than Dabi. Yes, that Dabi that we've had all these seasons is actually the son of Endeavor. Now, this is just really cool to have here, I think, because for anyone that is a little bit newer to the fandom, you might not know this, but for the longest time, up until this reveal, it was just a fan theory that, Toya Todoroki was actually Dabi, or Dabi was related to Endeavor somehow. And it seemed like just a fringe, crazy theory, and then it was revealed and it was true. Which is so cool, I feel like, because you can look at any of these series on here, and a lot of them do have some validity, and they could just be revealed at any moment. And then we move on to Tier 2, the Iceberg, UA Student. Vigilantes. My Hero Academia Vigilantes is a spin-off manga by Hideyuki Furuhashi. The series follows Koichi, aka the Crawler, and a group of Japanese vigilantes. It takes place a couple years before the main My Hero story, and while it does have its own plot, it brings in a lot of things from the main series that we're already familiar with. Characters that we already love like Mirko, Fat Gum, and of course my favorite, Aizawa. It even includes a special arc that's like a flashback of Aizawa, Present Mic, and Oboro. And this is really amazing because in the main series, when we find out that Kurogiri was actually Oboro, someone that Present Mic and Aizawa knew, it was heartbreaking, but we didn't feel a connection with that character. And this fills that void perfectly well. We get to learn all about Aizawa and Present Mic and Midnight of when they were at UA and they were becoming heroes and who they are today, and we get to learn a lot more about this Oboro character. It is totally worth reading just for this arc alone. And everyone who's been following this channel for a long time knows that I am an absolute die-hard Vigilantes fan. I think it is one of the best pieces of My Hero content out there. It's consistently amazing. I could not recommend the manga enough. Please go read it. Actually, please read it. I want there to be an anime so bad, so that maybe one day this is going to be just like a tier 1 thing, but please go out there, read it. It's amazing. I promise it's going to be good. Quirk Singularity. Quirk Singularity Doomsday Theory is a theory that revolves around the idea that as generations go on in the My Hero Academia universe, quirks are going to evolve and go with that as well. And so this means that they start out very simple, and then they start to grow more complex and more powerful, and eventually it's going to become so powerful that society is just going to rip itself apart. This theory was originally proposed by Kyodai Garaki, All for One's doctor. Back in the day, he proposed this to the scientific community and then was shunned and pushed to the shadows where he resides today. We see this come up quite a bit in My Hero, especially towards the later seasons of this singularity. It's always looming over the story. We have the main story that's really about Deku fighting Shigaraki and All for One, but Quirk Singularity is always in the background. It's slightly mentioned in tons and tons of chapters, and I think it is going to be key for how My Hero Academia ends. Team Up Missions. This is another manga spin-off series that revolves around the Team Up Mission program. Essentially what this is like, let's have a monthly series where we take a bunch of characters that don't normally interact all the time, put them together for a special mission against villains, and see how it pans out. This is a monthly series that just gets some of our favorite characters together for these one-shot stories, and they are absolutely wonderful. One of my favorites is Mei, Deku, and Melissa Shields, who hasn't showed up since the movie. This series is almost just like a fanfic one-shot, where you get a bunch of characters together and just throw them at a problem. I absolutely love it. It's more My Hero content, you can't beat it. Quirks dictate personality. This one is just talking about the pattern of how quirks and their users pair up a little too nicely. People like Kirishima, who are figuratively and literally like a rock. Or even Endeavor, who is very prone to get angry and have outbursts, and his quirk being fire. Now the question is the quirk actually dictating the personality, or is the quirk just developing an environment that helps foster that type of personality? Now you look at other people like Sato or Shinzo and you see that this doesn't quite line up well, so I'm thinking it's more of an environment. It's just fun to think about because people like Jiro, whose quirk is sound and she just loves music so much and it just pairs up like that, it's just really interesting to think about. Now us as readers know this is just an easy way to create a character, but something fun to think about. School Briefs. Now rounding out the rest of the spin-off series, this is a series of light novels that take place basically on everything that happens off screen in My Hero. These are basically just a collection of short stories that happen alongside the main story. They're usually pretty lighthearted slice of life stories. Some of the best ones include holidays, Parents' Day, or even just dorm life. If you want more My Hero content, this is just a really good place to go. And then we move on to Tier 3, the Provisional Hero tier. Deku is based off of Spider-Man, so we know Horikoshi loves Western media, and this includes comics. A lot of the inspiration for Deku and his hero design comes from Spider-Man. Both characters inherit their powers pretty late in life and revolve around themes of what does it mean to be a hero. And of course, after the Black Whip reveal, it's pretty easy to see the similarities. Omaga Doki Zoo. This is Horikoshi's first series in Jump and ran just shy of a year. The story revolves around Hana and her time at a cursed zoo. Basically, it's a zoo where all the animals can talk to her. What's notable here is the character Sakamata, who of course, if just looking at him, is the basis for Gang Orca. Original character designs. So this refers to the sketches that Horikoshi released around some of the first and early designs for My Hero Academia. So notable things here is Edgy Deku, who it actually isn't Deku. The original character was Mikumo Akatani, and you can see he's super edgy, looks like he's coming out of Hot Topic here, and Kaminari, who is clearly a villain. Now, does this have implications to other things going on in the story? Maybe. Regardless, this is just fun to check out to see what some of the early designs for My Hero looked like. Hagakure / Kaminari is the UA trader. Alright, so this is basically just talking about the UA trader and how Hagakure and Kaminari are probably the two most likely candidates. Kaminari for two reasons. One, the original villain design he had in the original sketches, and two, because of his earpiece. Maybe his original design implies that there is some villainous undertones to his character, or two, he's just a useful idiot and that his radio communicator was probably hacked. And Hagakure being because she's the side character of side characters. She's probably the lowest rated in popularity for Class 1A, and we don't have a strong attachment to her because of her invisibility. And the same invisibility is what lets her slip in and out of the class without people even noticing. There's a ton of possibilities for the UA trader, but I think these are two of the most likely candidates. We actually did an hour-long video on who all the possibilities might be, so if you want to go deep into that, you can check out that video. Deku's doctor is AFO's doctor. Alright, so you remember the first episode in this guy? Well, we later find out that that is just the same looking guy as AFO's doctor. I mean, look at his goggles, look at his mustache. He looks exactly the same. I'm sure it cannot go deeper than that, right? I'm sure we'll find out when we go a little further in the iceberg. And of course that leads us to tier 4, Pro Hero. Horikoshi forgot about the UA Trader. Now this is basically what the name says. Horikoshi wrote this really early on in My Hero, mostly a way to justify amping up security at UA and putting everyone in dorms. He wrote the line about UA Trader, and at this point he probably forgot about it. I mean, the easiest explanation is it's just All For One doing All For One things. We know that he has a lot of tendrils that go throughout everywhere. Now, it doesn't have to be a traitor amongst them, it could just be one of the quirks that he has. This is probably just the easiest explanation for who the UA Trader is, and there's a lot of loose ends in My Hero. Are all of them going to get tied up? Probably not, and that might include UA Trader. Hagakure is related to the Luminescent Baby. So this theory is just talking about how the Luminescent Baby may be Hagakure's ancestor. So if the first quirk user had a light manipulation quirk, we can see how over time this would just slowly evolve and turn into light bending to a strong degree, so strong that you can actually become invisible. Is this useful information? No, absolutely not, but it is a fun theory to think about. Ground Zero. Now, remember those original designs that we were talking about? Well, the original design for Bakugo actually had his hero name as Ground Zero. And because he didn't get his hero name until just recently in the manga, fans have been gravitating towards his original design name. Even fanfics that take place in the future of My Hero always refer to him as the hero Ground Zero. Now, obviously Horikoshi was tipped off that this might not be a good idea, with his association to the American tragedy. The Winged Nomu. So the Winged Nomu is one of the first Nomu that we meet and shows up during the Stain arc. So in flashbacks to Deku's childhood, we typically see this kid with wings. Now you might be saying, well, that's quite a stretch, the Nomu has wings, this kid has wings, where's the connection? Well, in an author's note that Horikoshi left in one of the mangas, we found out this kid, Tsubasa, actually became the Winged Nomu. It's not a theory at all, it's a totally confirmed thing by Horikoshi himself. Now Tsubasa is also interesting because he's friends with Deku, and Tsubasa is his family name, which is also the name of Deku's doctor, so which leads us into this next one. Deku's doctor is an AFO's doctor. Alright, so let's go another layer deeper here. Now, this is saying, although they look similar, they actually can't be the same person. It just doesn't make sense. So the big thing here is that they have different names. So we actually know his name because of his grandson Tsubasa. He shares his family name. But we know Kyodai Garaki is also the name of this doctor too, so it doesn't really make sense that they're the same person. I mean, does that mean like 60 years ago he made a clone of himself, gave it a different name, and had that clone raise a whole family just to later in life take his grandson and turn him into a Nomu? But yeah, it just sounds strange. They just don't actually line up as well as we thought. Like why would they have different names? Why would he turn his son into a Nomu? It just doesn't make sense. What the easy explanation for this is, Horikoshi just knows how to draw one doctor. And I'm sure this is where we end it, and we will definitely not go even deeper than this. And that brings us to tier 5, Tartarus. Horikoshi has a hand preference. Now, this is just a really funny thing because Horikoshi is really good at drawing hands. So much so that he flexes this all the time in My Hero. And for all the non-artists out there, this is a weird thing because hands are probably one of the hardest things to draw. So a lot of times artists just kind of skip over it. But not Horikoshi, he fixates on it. His little author icon is even a hand. So is Horikoshi just a special artist who's really good at hands, or is a little bit more going into this? Bakugo's anger keeps him alive. So this is just connecting the dots on his quirk. So his quirk is explosion, but the reason why he has explosion quirk is because he has nitroglycerin for sweat. He sweats out nitroglycerin, which creates the explosions. Now, nitroglycerin, when ingested, actually slows down your heart rate. Which would make sense that if Bakugo's heart rate was slower, he would have to keep angry, literally, to stay alive and keep his heart rate elevated. This is just a different take on the quirks dictate personality, not because they're intrinsically tied together, but because of some other factors. Shigaraki will defeat All For One. This is jumping off of a line that Deku said towards the end of the war arc. When he looked in Shigaraki's eyes, he saw that scared child that needed to be saved, and that he was going to do it. But at this point in the manga, All For One and Shigaraki are so closely tied that if he were to save him and release him for All For One, it would have to be through some dramatic means. And maybe those dramatic means just lead itself to Shigaraki finding out the truth about All For One and his childhood and defeating him. I think this could be a really interesting way to tie up that storyline, but I guess we'll see where it goes. Now, this revolves around the idea that AFO's doctor and Deku's doctor is probably the same person. Well, one of the nefarious things that could have happened because of this is whenever Deku was born, he could have had his quirk stolen away from him by this doctor. I mean, it would be so easy for him just to replace the x-rays and make him think he was born quirkless. Now, the thing that actually makes this quite possible is that his mom and his dad both have a quirk, so the fact he has a quirkless child is a really low probability. I mean, his dad having fire breathing and Inko having telekinetic abilities, that quirk combination could have been quite deadly. So much so that the doctor saw this and took the quirk away for All For One. So maybe if he had a different doctor, things would have turned out a little bit different. And with that, let's jump down to the 6th tier, Symbol of Evil. All For One is Deku's dad. Now, the question of where Deku's dad is comes up quite frequent. And a lot of what I know about this is based off of Vocal Pineapple's video. He has a really good breakdown of it. I would suggest you check that out. The big thing here is Horikoshi wrote himself a huge opening here. Deku's dad is confirmed alive, and he's confirmed not in the story. So it's a little bit weird that we never hear about him, but we know he exists somewhere. Horikoshi even stated in an interview that there will be a big reveal eventually. And what that reveal might be, could be All For One being Deku's dad. Now, a few of the things pointing towards its validity is 1, Aofa's face is always covered, always obscured, always hidden away from us. And number 2, we know that Horikoshi loves Star Wars. Now, what does Star Wars have to do with this? Well, he based All For One's design a little bit around Darth Vader, which, if you're looking at one of the biggest reveals in cinema history, he is Luke's father. And you can see the connection here, Luke and Vader, Deku and his dad, aka All For One. I think regardless of what happens, Deku's dad is going to be a really big reveal. I think it'd just be really fun if it was All For One. Shigaraki born quirkless. So this is all coming from Shigaraki's origin story because there's a couple details in there that you might have missed because they went quite fast. So we know Shigaraki didn't manifest his quirk until it was pretty late in life. Now, before he actually manifested his quirk though, he was brought home by this man. Now, we don't know too much about him. This was just a small scene that happened in between his origins, but this was probably All For One. I mean, if you think about the circumstances, we have this throwaway scene of where this man brings Shigaraki home, and then all of a sudden he manifests his quirk that kills his whole family. Now, I think it's pretty apparent what happened here. He saw a quirkless kid on the street, implanted decay into him, brought him home essentially as like a bomb to blow up his family, and when he was broken and on the street, picked him up so he can manipulate him as a child. We've seen how manipulative All For One can be. I don't even think this is a stretch. I know this isn't confirmed, but like in my eyes, it's all but confirmed. And this just lends itself to Shigaraki defeating All For One in the end when he finds this out. Stagnant civilization. So this is just pointing out how weird it is that we're 4 generations into quirks at this point, and civilization basically looks like it does in the year 2021. Now at this point in the story, we actually should be well into the 2100s, so we should be having flying cars and whatnot, and even because of quirks, you think that technology would advance way further than it normally would. But All Might even talks about this a little bit on how quirks are detrimental to society. We should have been in that mode. We should have been going to Mars at this point and having vacations among the stars, but instead, quirks kind of put technology back a little bit. Now, I think the important thing to note here is that it's painting quirks as bad. We're going to see this come up quite a bit in My Hero on how quirks are actually detrimental to society, and I think it's going to lead into the end of My Hero for sure. Creature Rejection Clan. So this is actually a small scene that we skip over in the anime. It's only shown in the manga. It only happens in 1 to 2 pages, but essentially what happens is at the start of the My Villain Academia arc, the League of Villains stumbles upon a mansion. And in that mansion, they find the Creature Rejection Clan, a religious fringe group that hates mutant-like quirks. So, of course, when they see Spinner, they call him out on this, tell him he's an abomination and whatnot, and of course, the League of Villains brutally murder all of them. Hell yeah, guys. Now, what's interesting here is we're only shown them in like 1 to 2 pages, but I think it sets the tone for the universe really well. And by that, I mean there are these groups out there that exist in My Hero. Not everyone totally gets along here. There's these fringe groups that hate on others because of their quirks. It's just another world building thing I really like about Horikoshi because he doesn't show just the good of this society, he also shows the bad and the bad things that happen out of quirks coming to existence. And we move on to tier 7, Liberated. Deku is the UA traitor. So this theory I actually watched from Dan Exclaims. It's a really interesting theory that Deku actually might be the key for why All For One knows so much about UA and all the students. Deku made a really big splash at the UA Sports Festival, which we know was televised all over Japan and was probably bigger than the Olympics. So that means All For One probably saw this broadcast. I mean, just looking at his abilities, him at UA, and All Might being a UA teacher at this point, it's really easy to figure out this is actually one for all. And once All For One knows that Deku has this ability, it's really easy to start creeping in at that point. I mean, whenever we see the vestiges later on in the manga, we see them with this strange door in the background. Now, the interesting thing here is behind that door is probably All For One. We know the two quirks are connected, and it would only make sense that the vestige state does connect them as well. So there probably is something in here that allows All For One to view and see what Deku is doing. Maybe not all the time, but probably at this time he was able to view him a little bit deeper. So when the USJ attack happens, that's right after the sports festival and right when All For One would have learned about Deku's ability. And so that leads us to the UA Trader of when this actually happened at the USJ incident. He knew so much about Deku and was able to fall out this attack because of that connection that All For One and One For All have. I really like this theory because I feel like it ties up a lot of loose ends. You know, what is that door that's actually in the vestige state? How is All For One and One For All really connected together? And who was the UA Trader? I think it ties up all those really nicely. Deku's doctor actually is All For One's doctor. Okay, so I know that we talked about all the reasons why they weren't the same person, because like how crazy would it be if Kyodai Garaki actually made a clone of himself way back in the past, had the clone have a completely different name, also be a doctor, and then raise a family only to have the grandson become a Nomu later on when he took him away. I know that sounds crazy, but I actually think it's the truth. I mean, Horikoshi is a great writer. Why would he just make two characters that have similar occupations, are incredibly important to the story, look exactly the same, and not connect them? That doesn't make any sense at all. Now, I know the details might seem a little bit fuzzy, but he does have access to All For One. And All For One is a deep resource of quirks. I'm sure a lot of this can be explained away with just, quirk manipulation. And just think about how valuable it would be to have clones all throughout Japan of yourself, being able to take quirks when you really need them. Now, I know actually thinking about it and all the details seems a little fuzzy and it doesn't make sense. I'm just gonna say, I think they are the same person. If you just like kind of squint your eyes a little bit and just like blur those little bit of details, I feel like it just lends itself so much easier to like all these possibilities, and it just makes so much more sense. Now, the fact that they might be the same person or clones of the same person, like they are connected in some way, and that doesn't lend itself to all the theories being true. And so we could just have him being a clone, but nothing nefarious behind it. Nothing nefarious with Deku or grander implications of the story. I'm sure that there was like nefarious things happening under him and him being a doctor at that hospital, but maybe not connected with Deku. Maquia is Crimson Riot. Okay, so this one is like a ton of speculation, but I think it's so interesting because of the little pieces that you take to actually put it together. So in My Hero Academia Vigilantes, there's a scene where All For One is talking about stealing quirks from heroes. Now this scene happens, I would say, about 20 years before the main story, and in the scene we see a lot of familiar faces of heroes that we know today. And one of those heroes is Crimson Riot. Now, the weird part about this is if you think about Crimson Riot, is if he was a hero, a great hero about 20 years ago, he never shows up anymore now. We don't know where he's at. He's not a currently active hero, which is strange considering where we're at in the story on if he retired within the last 20 years and he was a great hero, he probably should still be around and he probably should be helping the heroes right now, right? Well, what if he went missing? What if All For One took him and, All For One has all these abilities to be able to manipulate minds, insert quirks into people? What if he inserted some quirks that turned him into Maquia? Now, you might be thinking, what's the point of this? That doesn't make any sense at all. Now, you might be thinking, why is this important? Well, think about Kirishima for a moment. He became a hero because Maquia was harassing his friends and he couldn't stand up for them. And so when he couldn't stand up for them, he looked towards his idol, Crimson Riot, who was a symbol of manliness, and he wanted to become just like him. Now, think about how poetic it could be if this person he looked up towards to become a hero ended up being the same person that caused him to want to be a hero in the same place. I think it just lines up really, really well. It could be incredibly poetic and a really cool reveal to Kirishima's story. Now, will it actually come to pass? I don't know. I think it's a little bit of a stretch, but the details are out there. I think it actually could point to being true. Female Nomu. Okay, so during the war arc, there was a breakout of a ton of Nomu. Now, one Nomu specifically stands out because it's a woman Nomu. We haven't really seen that before. So why is this so important? Now, this Nomu showed a lot of intelligence as well, and we know that high characteristics from Nomu typically means that they're important people, like Kurogiri being Oboro. Now, what's interesting here is that the only important woman in the story that we don't really have a follow-up for is Nana Shimura. Okay, so this detail is a little bit of a stretch to find, but in the Two Heroes movie, there is a small OVA if you get the DVD. That OVA is all about All Might going to America, like why he went to America. And the reason why is because Nana Shimura had a showdown with All For One and sent All Might away. Now, if this was the last place that we left her fighting All For One, which she probably died during that, it stands to be true that he could have just taken her and turned her into a Nomu, which would make sense of why we're shown a female Nomu, is because it's someone that we know already. I think this would just be another tragic thing to throw into the story. It breaks my heart, but I mean, it is a detail you cannot stop looking at. And that brings us to the last tier, Tier 8, Singularity. Shigaraki will be the 10th user of One For All. So this is building off of the theory that Shigaraki might defeat All For One. So in this scenario, whenever Deku and Shigaraki have their showdown, Shigaraki actually gets One For All. Now this could be from two ways. One, him actually using All For One to steal that ability, or maybe Deku gives it up to him on purpose. Maybe All For One and One For All coming together, the easiest way to do that is to just give it to Shigaraki, who's going to take both of those abilities and defeat All For One. And of course, when I say All For One, I mean All For One the person, not the quirk, because they're kind of living together in Shigaraki at this moment. It's a little bit weird, but he is going to defeat the person that is All For One while having One For All and All For One together. Does that make sense? Yeah, it probably shouldn't. Willpower and fate are real forces. Alright, so this one is going to get a little bit into philosophy, so bear with me for a moment. So when we see Sir Night-Eye, we know his quirk is seeing into the future. He's able to see certain events as are going to happen. Now, the weird thing with this is if he's able to tell the future, and we're going to lead to that future, do we actually have free will? I mean, if it's already determined that we're going to get there, that means all of our actions that lead to that moment are already determined. Now, the strange thing he talks about is that in some special circumstances, this could actually be rewritten and changed. And the way this is actually changed is through strong willpower, which I actually think is a real thing in this universe. I mean, people with wills strong enough to break this are Deku and All Might, but if you think about them, maybe that's because they have the stockpiling quirk. I mean, if you can just stockpile willpower and use it all at once, that's enough to shatter fate. Like literally in this universe, fate is a real thing that exists, and they're stockpiling willpower to be able to break that. So while most people in this universe might not have free will because Night-Eye can see the future and therefore their actions don't actually matter, there might be something in this universe that can break that, and it's willpower. And it's people like Deku and All Might that can change fate. End of all quirks, My Hero Academia ending. So we end this iceberg with the way My Hero Academia might end itself. We've been dripped this knowledge about quirk singularity, about how quirks are actually bad for society, and that eventually All For One and One For All are going to need to come together. I think the thing that makes the most sense, the way to deal with singularity, to deal with quirks being bad for society, is for Deku to take both of these abilities, One For All and All For One, and bring them together to erase all quirks. Now, I know this might be a stretch about destroying all quirks, but if you think about it for a second, we've been dripped this knowledge throughout the entire series about how quirks are bad. And we also know that Deku is going to become the greatest hero. He never actually says he's going to become the #1 hero, just the greatest hero. And the way he can become the greatest hero is by defeating the greatest villain of all time and eliminating this thing that's holding back society. Quirks aren't actually good for society. We've seen they've only been detrimental to it. So to become the greatest hero of all time, Deku's going to destroy all quirks. Everyone's quirk. Gone. Now, this might seem a bit extreme because it cuts off all the possibility of future things happening in My Hero, but I actually think that's the reason why. I actually think Horikoshi might be brave enough to do this. When he was originally thinking about the series, it was supposed to be a lot shorter than this. It wasn't going to be a huge long shonen or anything, which I think that feeling is still going to be permeated in the ending of the series. But I guess we'll have to wait until the ending to see how it's really going to end, but we're going to get there sooner than later. And of course, that ends the My Hero Academia iceberg. Thank you all so much for watching. If there's anything in here that you want me to go a little bit deeper into, let me know in the comments below. I think I can make a video about just about anything here, and I really would love to, so if you want to see one of them, definitely let me know. And if there's any other theories or deep knowledge I didn't cover here, comment it down below. Maybe we can make a second iceberg, or maybe I'll just do those as one-off videos as well. Thank you all so much for watching. I will see you all next class.